Ethan Caldwell grabbed the divorce papers off the table and slapped them down in front of his wife so hard the water glasses shook. "Sign it," he said, "and be grateful I'm offering you anything at all." Claire didn't flinch. She picked up the pen, opened to the final page, and signed her name. The lawyer reached for the document and froze. His face went white. His hands began to tremble. He looked up at Ethan with an expression no attorney ever wants to wear in front of a client. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, "do you have any idea who you just spoke to like that?" Ethan stopped smiling, and the room stopped breathing. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, follow until the very last word, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower smelled like leather and old money. It was the kind of room where powerful people made decisions that broke other people's lives, and nobody apologized for it afterward. The chairs were high-backed, the carpet was dark burgundy, and the windows looked out over a city that had no idea what was about to happen inside those walls. Ethan Caldwell sat at the head of the long mahogany table like he owned it, because in his mind, he owned everything in that room, including the outcome of the next 2 hours. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His hair was perfect. His watch caught the light every time he moved his hand, which was often because Ethan Caldwell was not a man who sat still. He was a man who moved through rooms like he was always about to win something. His attorney, Marcus Webb, sat to his right, a sharp-featured man in his 50s with silver at his temples, and the kind of controlled expression that only came from decades of sitting in rooms exactly like this one, watching marriages dissolve into paperwork. On the other side of the table sat Claire. She was wearing a simple cream blouse and dark trousers, no jewelry except for small pearl earrings. Her dark hair was pulled back quietly. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, completely still. She had no attorney with her. That detail alone had made Marcus raise an eyebrow when she walked in. He had leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "She came alone." And Ethan had smiled the way a man smiles when he believes the game is already over before it starts. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia Hines, opened her folder and cleared her throat. "We're here today to finalize the terms of dissolution for the marriage of Ethan James Caldwell and Claire Marie Caldwell," she said. "As both parties have agreed to proceed without contested litigation, we'll begin by reviewing what each party is requesting from the marital estate." She turned toward Ethan first. Ethan gestured to Marcus, who slid a document across the table. "Mr. Caldwell is requesting sole ownership of Caldwell Development Group, the primary residence at 900 North Michigan, the vehicle fleet and the investment portfolio currently held under the joint account," Marcus said. "He is prepared to offer Mrs. Caldwell a settlement of $400,000 as a final and full resolution." Patricia wrote it down without expression. Then she turned to Claire. "And Mrs. Caldwell, what is your request?" There was a moment, just a moment, the kind where a room holds its breath without knowing why. Claire unfolded her hands. She reached forward, took the settlement document that Marcus had slid across the table, looked at it briefly, and then pushed it back. "I don't want anything," she said. The mediator looked up. "I'm sorry. I don't want the house. I don't want the cars. I don't want the portfolio. I don't want the settlement offer." Claire's voice was calm, not cold calm, like someone who had already decided something a long time ago and was simply following through. "I want the divorce. That's all." The room went quiet. Marcus Webb looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at her notepad. The court stenographer's fingers paused above her keyboard. And Ethan Caldwell stared at his wife across the table. Then he laughed. It started as a short exhale, almost disbelieving, and then it grew into something fuller, something that filled the room, the way his laughter always did, taking up more space than it deserved. "You're serious," he said. It wasn't a question. Claire didn't flinch. "I'm serious." 7 years, Ethan said, shaking his head. 7 years of living in that penthouse, driving those cars, going to those dinners, wearing the clothes I paid for, and you want nothing. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Claire, come on. What is this? What are you trying to do?" "I'm not trying to do anything, Ethan. Are you trying to make me feel guilty? Because I don't. I want you to know that. I don't feel guilty." "I know," she said quietly. "Then why?" He spread his hands open. "Why would any woman walk away from a $400,000 settlement and ask for nothing that makes no sense?" It makes sense to me. Ethan turned to Marcus. Is this legal? Can she do this? Marcus nodded slowly. Technically, yes. If she waives her rights to marital assets and signs the waiver voluntarily, she can walk away with nothing. It's unusual, but it's legal. Ethan turned back to Claire, and for just a moment, just one fraction of a second, something moved across his face that might have been discomfort. But it passed quickly, replaced by the familiar confidence that had never really left him. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. Maybe not. You think this makes you look strong, walking away with nothing. You know what people are going to say. They're going to say you had nothing to fight for. They're going to say, Ethan. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. I didn't come here to argue. I came here to sign the papers. He stared at her. Before I met you, he said slowly, and his voice had shifted now, something sharper underneath it. You were working in a bookstore. A bookstore, Claire. You were making, $12 an hour. You had a studio apartment with a broken heater. You borrowed money from your roommate to fix your car. He leaned forward. I gave you this life. I gave you everything you have, and now you want to walk away and pretend that doesn't mean anything. Claire looked at him, steady, unblinking. You did give me things, Ethan, she said. You're right about that. He seemed satisfied. Then, but you never gave me yourself, she finished, and that's the only thing I ever actually wanted. The room was so quiet after that, the only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Marcus, who was studying the table. He looked at Patricia, who was writing something down very carefully and deliberately, not making eye contact with either of them. That's very poetic, Ethan said finally, but the laugh was gone from his voice. That's a very nice thing to say, but this isn't a movie, Claire. This is real life, and in real life you're about to walk out of here with nothing. I know, she said again, and you're okay with that. Yes. Why? He said it differently this time, not sarcastically, not dismissively. He actually asked it, and something in his expression shifted, something genuinely confused. Why are you okay with that? Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because everything I need I already have. Ethan shook his head slowly. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have for you. Patricia cleared her throat. If both parties are ready to proceed, we can move forward with the signing. Ethan waved his hand. Fine, let's do it. The paperwork was organized and slid across the table. Ethan signed his sections quickly, efficiently, the way he signed everything, like a man who had somewhere more important to be. Then the folder was pushed toward Claire. She picked up the pen. She opened the document to the final signature page, and she signed her name, her full name. Marcus Webb was the one who looked at it first, because it was his job to review all signatures before the documents were finalized. He picked up the folder, turned to the signature page, and read the name that Claire had written. His hand stopped moving. He read it again. Then he set the folder down very carefully, and the color had left his face. Mr. Caldwell, Marcus said. His voice was different. Controlled in a new way, not professionally controlled, but carefully controlled the way a person speaks when they are trying to stay calm, because the alternative is something they cannot afford in this room. Ethan looked up from his phone, where he had already begun composing a text to someone. What? You need to look at this. I've already seen the papers, Marcus. Not these papers. Marcus pushed the folder across the table. Her signature. Ethan sighed the way he always sighed when he felt people were wasting his time. He reached over, picked up the folder, looked down at the signature line. He read the name. The folder stayed in his hands, but he went very still. Not the stillness of confidence, not the stillness of a man in control. The stillness of a man who has just walked into a room and realized too late that the floor he was standing on was not solid. Because the name written on that line was not Claire Caldwell. It was not even Claire Marie, which was how she had introduced herself on every document he had ever seen her sign. The name written in that quiet, steady handwriting was Claire Alexandra Whitmore. And in the world that Ethan Caldwell had built his entire career inside the world of real estate development, private investment, financial architecture, the name Whitmore was not just a name. It was a history. It was a dynasty. It was the kind of name that people mentioned in boardrooms in lowered voices, the way you might mention a piece of art you knew you could never afford to look at directly. The Whitmore family had been shaping American financial markets for over 60 years. Not loudly, not publicly, Not in the way that newer billionaires shaped markets with press releases and magazine covers and social media announcements. The Whitmores had always operated the way the deepest roots of a tree operated, invisible to the eye but holding everything up. Whitmore Global Holdings had stakes in technology companies, pharmaceutical research, infrastructure development, and international foundations that funded entire national economies in developing countries. They were the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because the people who needed to know about it already did. And the woman sitting across the table from Ethan Caldwell, the woman he had just laughed at in front of a mediator and 2 lawyers, was the only daughter of that family. Ethan's fingers gripped the folder. He stopped. This can't be right. I assure you it is, Claire said. Her voice had not changed at all. She was still perfectly calm, still perfectly still. You told me your name was Claire Marie. His voice had a different quality to it now. Not angry yet, stunned. My name is Claire Alexandra Whitmore, she said. I've always used my middle name socially. Most people do. You told me. Ethan pushed back his chair and stood up, and for the first time in that room, his body language was not the language of a man who owned the space. You told me your family was from Wisconsin. You said your father worked in insurance. My father did work in insurance, Claire said. He started out managing risk portfolios for small businesses in Milwaukee. That part was true. That's not the whole story. You never asked for the whole story, Ethan. She tilted her head slightly. In 7 years, you never once asked me about my father's work. You knew I came from Wisconsin. You knew I had a quiet family that didn't attend your events, and you decided that meant they were unimportant. A pause. You decided I was unimportant. Ethan was standing now, and Marcus was looking at him with an expression that said very plainly that Ethan needed to sit down and think very carefully before he said anything else. But Ethan was not good at thinking carefully before he spoke. He had never needed to be. Why? He said it again, and this time the word carried everything, all the confusion, all the disbelief, and something underneath both of those that was too large and too uncomfortable for him to name yet. Why didn't you tell me? Claire looked at him. Because I needed to know, she said simply. Know what? Whether you loved me. She said it without drama, without performance, the way someone states a fact they have carried for a very long time. I was 27 years old when I met you, Ethan. I had spent my entire life being Claire Whitmore. I had spent my entire life watching people respond to my last name before they ever responded to me. Friends who became friends because of what my family could offer. People who pursued relationships with me because they understood even vaguely what it meant to be connected to my family. She paused. I was so tired of it. I wanted just once to meet someone who had no idea, someone who would know me as just Claire, and I wanted to find out what that felt like. Ethan's jaw was tight. So our entire marriage was what a test? No. For the first time, something moved across Claire's face that was not composure, something that had been waiting a long time to be said and was finally being given permission. Our entire marriage was a hope that the man I fell in love with was real, that the person you were in those first years before the business got bigger, before the deals got more important, before I became furniture in your house instead of a person in your life, I hoped that person was who you actually were. She looked down at her folded hands for just a moment, then back up. He wasn't, and I spent about 4 years figuring that out. 4 years, Ethan repeated. 4 years of watching you become someone I didn't recognize. 4 years of trying to reach you. 4 years of conversations that went nowhere, of being told I was too sensitive, of watching you look through me at dinner parties, the way you look through windows. I'm there, you just don't see me. Her voice was steady, but there was weight in it now. Real weight. The kind that accumulated over years of being dismissed by someone you loved. I'm not saying you're evil, Ethan. I'm not here to destroy you, but I am done waiting for you to see me. The room was so quiet. Marcus had placed his pen down. He was not looking at his notes. Patricia had stopped writing. The stenographer's hands were completely still. Ethan stood at the edge of the table, and for a moment, just a moment, the armor cracked. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. Just a hairline fracture, the kind that you might not notice unless you were looking for it. Then he straightened his jacket. You should have told me, he said, and his voice was flat now. You should have told me who you were. Would it have changed anything? She asked. He didn't answer. That's what I thought, she said softly. Ethan sat back down. He looked at Marcus. Are we done here? Marcus glanced at the documents and then at Claire. There are a few additional items that need to be... Actually, Claire said, there is one more thing. Ethan looked at her. Claire reached into the soft leather bag beside her chair, not a designer bag, just a plain, well-made bag, and placed a manila envelope on the table. She slid it toward the center, not toward Ethan specifically, just to the center of the table. What is that? He asked. Documentation, she said. Marcus leaned forward. Documentation of what? Of the financial activities that occurred during our marriage, Claire said, specifically certain fund transfers that took place between 2021 and 2024. Certain reclassifications of assets that your accounting team made without full disclosure to your board of directors, and certain decisions Ethan made regarding investor communications that may be of interest to the SEC. The air in the room changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was a subtle one, the way the air changes in a room when something very significant has just been placed on a table and everyone present knows it, but no one has moved yet. Ethan looked at the envelope, then at Claire. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have 7 years of household access to your home office, your email system, which I helped you set up and never secured properly, and a very thorough understanding of how your company's financial structure works, Claire said. I also have a background in financial analysis that I never mentioned to you because you never asked what I studied in college. She paused. I have quite a good idea what I'm talking about. Marcus was staring at his client. His expression had passed through several stages in the last 30 seconds and arrived somewhere that was trying very hard to remain professional. This is not why I'm here, Claire continued. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to send you to prison. I'm here to get a divorce. She looked at Ethan directly. But I thought you should know that I know. Because for 7 years, Ethan, you made decisions in our home and our shared space as if I didn't exist, as if I couldn't see, as if the woman cooking dinner in the kitchen at 8 o'clock at night while you made phone calls about fund reclassifications in your office wasn't actually listening. Ethan's eyes were very still. I was always listening, she said. I just never knew what to do with it because I kept hoping you would change, kept hoping you would stop, kept hoping the man I married would come back. A quiet breath. He didn't. Ethan's hands were flat on the table. His expensive watch caught the light. He was not moving. The documentation in that envelope has already been reviewed by my family's legal team, Claire said. It has not been filed with any regulatory body. Whether it ever is filed depends entirely on how the rest of this process goes. She looked at Marcus. I would encourage you to advise your client carefully. Marcus turned to Ethan. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Ethan looked at his wife across the table. This woman he had laughed at 45 minutes ago. This woman he had dismissed. This woman he had reminded in front of lawyers and a mediator that she had once worked in a bookstore. He looked at her, and for the first time in 7 years, he actually saw her. Not what she wore, not what she could offer his social calendar, not the body beside him at charity dinners and business dinners and birthday dinners where he always sat at the center of the table. He saw her, and what he saw made something cold move through him. Because the woman across the table was not fragile, she was not desperate. She was not the woman he had constructed in his mind, the quiet, grateful wife who needed him to define her. She was someone who had been paying attention for 7 years, someone who had been patient, someone who had been waiting, not for revenge, for clarity, and now she had it. Patricia, Claire said, turning back to the mediator, I believe we can finalize the remaining signatures. As I said, I'm not requesting anything from the marital estate. I simply want the marriage dissolved. Patricia looked at Ethan. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. His jaw worked. His eyes moved from the envelope to Claire's face and back. Fine, he said finally. The word came out different than it would have an hour ago. Smaller. The remaining documents were signed. The marriage of Ethan James Caldwell and Claire Alexandra Whitmore was dissolved. Claire picked up her bag and straightened her cream blouse. She looked across the table at Ethan one final time. I expected her to say something final, something that landed, the kind of exit line that people said at moments like this. But Claire didn't say anything. She simply nodded a small, dignified nod that carried in it everything she had already said and everything she had chosen not to say. Then she walked to the door, opened it, and left. The click of the door was very soft. In the conference room on the 42nd floor, 3 professionals and one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen sat in silence. Ethan stared at the door for a moment. Then he looked down at the documents on the table, at the name written in that steady, quiet handwriting, Claire Alexandra Whitmore. He had laughed at her. He had laughed at the woman whose family had funded half the industry he spent his career trying to climb. He had laughed at the woman who knew things about his company that could bring it down. He had laughed at the woman who had chosen to love him without armor, without her last name, without anything to protect herself, and he had used that openness to make her feel small. Marcus Webb was the first to speak. He did it quietly, the way attorneys speak when they are managing something that has gone significantly beyond what they planned for. "Ethan," he said, "we need to talk." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was still looking at the door, because something had shifted inside him, not enough yet, not in the way that shifts become permanent, but something small and uncomfortable had taken root. The man who had laughed when she asked for nothing was beginning to understand that she had not asked for nothing because she had nothing to fight for. She had asked for nothing because she had already won something he didn't have words for yet, and that specific realization, arriving in that specific moment in that specific room, was the beginning of an unraveling that Ethan Caldwell could not yet see the end of. Outside the conference room in the elevator going down, Claire pressed the lobby button and stood very still. Her reflection looked back at her from the polished elevator doors. She had not cried. She would not cry, not here, not in this building, not where any of those people could see. But her hands still folded in front of her, pressed together slightly harder than usual. 7 years of loving someone who had slowly, methodically, without even meaning to, turned her into a shadow. 7 years of wondering whether the problem was him or her, whether she was asking for too much, whether the quiet that grew between them was something she had caused. 7 years of looking across dinner tables and boardroom functions and morning kitchen silences, trying to find the man who had once sat with her on a park bench in Lincoln Park and talked for 4 hours without either of them noticing the time pass. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Chicago was gray and wet outside the lobby windows, the kind of November afternoon that leaned on everything. Claire walked toward the exit, and just before she pushed through the glass door, she paused. Not because she was uncertain, because she needed one breath, just one, to mark the moment. Then she pushed the door open and walked out into the rain. Behind her in the building she had just left, a man named Ethan Caldwell was sitting at a mahogany table with his hands pressed flat against its surface, staring at a name he should have known, should have asked about, should have been curious enough to discover, should have cared enough to understand. He was 36 years old. He was one of Chicago's most successful real estate developers. I had a penthouse and a car collection and a company worth millions and friends who came to his parties and business partners who laughed at his jokes. And sitting in that conference room with a manila envelope on the table and his lawyer watching him with the carefully neutral expression of a professional who is internally revising every assumption he has ever made about this case, Ethan Caldwell felt for the first time in a very long time completely and utterly alone. And the most terrifying part was that he didn't know yet whether that feeling was a punishment or a beginning. Marcus Webb had been a divorce attorney for 23 years. He had sat in rooms where people screamed at each other, where men threw furniture, where women wept so hard they could not breathe. He had seen things in conference rooms that most people only saw in courtrooms. He thought he had seen everything. He had not seen this. I was still holding the document when Ethan reached across and took it from his hands. Ethan looked down at the signature. He read it once. Then he read it again, the way you reread something when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling it. Claire Alexandra Whitmore. He set the paper down. He looked across the table at the empty chair where Claire had been sitting 60 seconds ago. The chair was still slightly pushed back from where she had stood. Her glass of water was still on the table, half full with a faint lipstick mark on the rim. She was gone, and she had left behind a name that was detonating slowly inside Ethan's chest, like something with a very long fuse. "Marcus," he said. His voice was controlled. He was working very hard to keep it that way. "Tell me I'm wrong about what I think that name means." Marcus did not answer immediately. That alone told Ethan everything. "Marcus, you're not wrong," Marcus said quietly. Ethan pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, looking out over the city. Chicago spread out below him, gray and indifferent, doing what cities do, moving, breathing, existing without any awareness of what was falling apart 42 floors above its streets. "How did I not know this?" Ethan said. It was not a question. It was something a person says out loud when they are trying to understand their own blindness. People know what they're told, Marcus said carefully. If she never told you, 7 years. Ethan turned around. 7 years, Marcus. We were married. We shared a home. We shared a bed. She met my business partners. She sat at my dinners. She listened to me talk about deals and investments and market positioning for 7 years. He stopped. His jaw was tight. And she never said a word. No, Marcus agreed. She didn't. Why? Ethan said, and the word came out differently than it had in the conference room when he'd asked Claire directly. This time it wasn't defensive. This time it was genuinely lost. Why would someone do that? Marcus folded his hands on the table. You heard what she said. She wanted to know if I loved her. Ethan said it flatly, like something he was still processing. She wanted to know if I loved her without knowing who she was. That's what she said. And he looked at Marcus directly. What do you think the answer was based on what you just watched in this room? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I was not a man who trafficked in unnecessary honesty when it didn't serve his client. But sometimes a client needed to hear something true more than they needed to hear something comfortable. Ethan, he said carefully, I think the more pressing conversation right now is the envelope. The envelope. Ethan had almost not forgotten it. Nothing that significant could be forgotten, but in the shock of the name, the envelope had moved to a secondary position in his mind. Now Marcus pushed it back to the center where it belonged, and Ethan felt the weight of it differently than he had when Claire first placed it on the table. He walked back to the table and sat down. He looked at the manila envelope. He did not touch it. She said her family's legal team has already reviewed it, Ethan said. I heard her. She said it hasn't been filed. I heard that too. What does that mean? What is she? Is this a threat? Is she holding this over my head? Marcus chose his next words, the way a man chooses his steps, when he's not entirely sure the ground will hold. It means, he said, that whatever is in that envelope, she has the resources and the legal infrastructure to act on it. The fact that she hasn't filed it yet is, I would call it, a gesture of restraint. Restraint. Ethan repeated the word like it tasted foreign. She's not trying to destroy you, Ethan. I believe she told you that directly. She's also not trying to protect me. No, Marcus agreed. She's not. Ethan looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he reached out and opened it. What was inside was not what he expected, which was something dramatic. Photographs, printed emails, financial records with red circles drawn around the significant numbers. Instead, it was a clean, professionally organized document, a report. 43 pages formatted with the precision of something prepared by people who did this kind of work for a living and did it very well. He turned to the first page and started reading. By page 4, his breathing had changed. By page 9, his hand had come up to cover his mouth. By page 14, he closed the report and set it down on the table and did not move for a very long time. Marcus was watching him. How bad? Ethan looked up. The confidence that had been in his face all morning, the easy habitual confidence of a man who had never seriously had to question whether the ground was solid beneath him, was gone. In its place was something rawer, something that had not been visible in a very long time, possibly because it had been buried under years of success and momentum and the particular self-assurance that comes from never really losing. She documented everything, Ethan said. Marcus waited. The transfers in 2021, the account reclassifications, the investor report from March of 2023 that we revised before it went out. He paused. She has the original, the version before we revised it. Marcus did not visibly react, but his jaw tightened. How? He asked. How does she have that? Because I did the revision in my home office, Ethan said, and I never deleted the original from the shared drive. He put both hands flat on the table. I never thought to delete it because I never thought she was paying attention. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which two intelligent people are simultaneously understanding the full shape of a problem they had not previously seen clearly. She said she has a background in financial analysis, Marcus said slowly. I know. You didn't know that about her. I know. In 7 years, you didn't know your wife had a background in financial analysis. Ethan looked at his lawyer. I know, Marcus. You don't have to say it again. Marcus closed his notepad, opened it again, closed it. Ethan, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Not as your client, but as someone I've worked with for 8 years, and who I would prefer not to see make a catastrophic error in the next 48 hours. Ask. Is there anything else? Anything beyond what's in that report that she might know about anything that— No. Then Ethan stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe. Marcus sat back in his chair. There are some things from 2022, Ethan said carefully. Some decisions I made regarding the Northgate project, the way we structured the partnership agreements, some of the representations we made to the secondary investors. Define some. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The kind that would be difficult to explain in front of a regulatory body. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, opened them. And she was in the house during 2022. She was in the house for all of it, Ethan said. She was always in the house. Outside Chicago continued doing what it did. Traffic moved on Michigan Avenue. Somewhere below them, a lunch crowd was filling restaurants and coffee shops. The world was completely indifferent to the fact that Ethan Caldwell's carefully constructed reality was developing fractures in multiple places simultaneously. Marcus stood up. I need to make some calls. I need you to not contact Claire or anyone associated with her family until I've had a chance to assess where we actually stand. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out exactly who Claire Alexandra Whitmore is, Marcus said, which I should have done before we ever walked into this room. He picked up his briefcase. And Ethan, whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you want to say or do, I need you to sit on it. Don't call her. Don't reach out to her. Don't do anything impulsive. Ethan nodded, once, after Marcus left. Ethan sat alone in the conference room. The mediator and the stenographer had gathered their things and slipped out quietly sometime during the conversation, the way professionals do when they understand that what's happening in a room is no longer something they're supposed to witness. He sat with the 43-page report in front of him and the empty glass with Claire's lipstick mark on the rim and the silence of a room that had held something enormous and was now just a room again. He thought about something she had said, not the part about the documentation, not the part about the fund transfers or the investor reports. The part she had said before all of that. The part that had landed differently than anything else she said, even though he hadn't let himself show it. You never gave me yourself, and that's the only thing I ever actually wanted. He sat with that for a long time. Across town in an office that occupied the top floor of a building that did not have its name on the outside because it did not need to. Claire was sitting across from a man named Gerald Whitmore, her father. Gerald Whitmore was 71 years old. He was not physically imposing. He was of medium height and medium build, with white hair that he kept short and eyes that were very dark and very alert, in a face that had learned over decades to reveal almost nothing. He wore a plain dark suit and no visible jewelry, and he sat behind his desk, the way men sit when they have never needed a desk to make them seem important. When Claire walked in, he looked at her, the way fathers look at daughters who have just done something that cost them more than anyone outside the room will ever understand. It's done, he asked. It's done, she said. She sat down across from him. The chair was a deep green leather, and she had sat in it thousands of times growing up in college, when she came home for holidays in her 20s, when she was trying to figure out who she was outside of this office and this name. Gerald studied her face. How do you feel? Strange, she said honestly, not the way I expected. How did you expect to feel? She thought about it. Lighter. I expected to feel lighter. And instead I feel, she paused, like I just closed a door that I waited too long to close, and now I'm standing in a hallway and I don't know which direction I'm supposed to walk. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then, did he laugh? Claire looked at her father. Yes. Something moved across Gerald Whitmore's face. It was brief and controlled, but it was there. When you told him you wanted nothing. Yes. Gerald nodded slowly. He picked up his pen the way he always did when he was thinking and turned it once between his fingers. I want to be very clear about something, he said. What happens next with the documentation, with the regulatory question, that is entirely your decision. I want you to understand that. Whatever you decide, I will support it, but it has to be yours. I know, Claire said. Because your mother— He stopped himself, started again. Your mother always said that the worst thing you could do after something like this was let someone else decide how it ends for you, even someone who loves you. Claire looked at her father. Her mother had died when Claire was 19. Ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. There were still moments when her absence arrived in conversations without warning the way it did, now sliding in through a door that was never fully closed. "I'm not going to file it," Claire said. "Not immediately. I told him that. I told him it depends on how the rest of the process goes. And if he comes after you, he won't. You're confident of that. He's not stupid, Dad. He's arrogant. Those aren't the same thing." She folded her hands in her lap. "He knows what that report means. He'll make the calculation." Gerald looked at her for a moment. Then he said something he had been holding for a while. "I should have pushed harder. 7 years ago, when you told me you didn't want to disclose anything about the family to him, I should have pushed harder." "You couldn't have changed my mind." "I know, but I should have tried harder." "Dad." She met his eyes. "If you had changed my mind, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if what we had was real, wondering if he would have been different if I'd been just Claire." She paused. "Now I don't have to wonder." Gerald Whitmore set his pen down. He looked at his daughter, this woman who had his wife's cheekbones and her mother's patience and a particular quality of stillness that had always reminded him of deep water calm on the surface, with something powerful and cold moving underneath. "Your mother would have been very proud of you today," he said. Claire pressed her lips together, nodded once, looked away. And in the silence that followed, the weight of 7 years settled around them both, not as something suffocating, but as something that had finally been given permission to be what it was. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Caldwell had made a decision he had explicitly been told not to make. He called Claire. She didn't answer. He called again. Voicemail. He put the phone down on the seat beside him in the back of his car, his driver taking him back to the penthouse because there was nowhere else to go, and he stared at the city through the window, the way he had stared at it for years, from positions of complete certainty, and he tried to figure out when exactly the certainty had become an illusion. His phone buzzed. Not Claire. His business partner, Derek Holt. Derek was 44, loud, reliable, and one of the few people Ethan had consistently trusted in business. They had built Caldwell Development together from the ground up, not from nothing, because neither of them had ever truly come from nothing, but from the specific kind of ambition that takes what it has and multiplies it aggressively. "You done with the lawyer stuff?" Derek asked when Ethan picked up. "Just finished." "Good, because I need you on a call in an hour with the Northgate secondary investors. There are questions about the Q3 reporting and Davies is nervous." "Cancel it," Ethan said. Pause. "What?" "Cancel the call, Derek." "Ethan, we can't cancel this call. Davies has been asking for—" "I said cancel it." His voice came out harder than he intended. He modified it. "Something's come up. I'll explain later." Another pause. Longer this time. Derek knew Ethan well enough to hear the difference between a postponement and a problem. "Everything okay?" "I'll call you tonight," Ethan said, and ended the call. He looked back out the window. The Northgate project, the secondary investors, the partnership agreements from 2022, with the representations that would be difficult to explain in front of a regulatory body. Claire knew about Northgate. I didn't know how much she knew. The report covered 2021 through 2024, and the Northgate issues were primarily in 2022, but she had referenced it specifically in that report. Not in detail, the Northgate section was brief, perhaps 3 pages, but it was there. It was named. It was documented. And Whitmore Global Holdings had access to financial forensics resources that made most private investigative firms look like they were working with crayon and construction paper. His phone buzzed again. Marcus this time. "I told you not to contact her," Marcus said when Ethan picked up. "You have my phones monitored now." "She texted me, 1 line, said you called twice. She wanted me to tell you that she's not interested in a conversation today and that her position hasn't changed." Ethan leaned his head back against the seat. "What does that mean, her position hasn't changed?" "Her position is that she doesn't want anything. She wants the divorce. She's getting the divorce." "Her position on the documentation," Marcus said carefully. "She's holding it. She's holding it. For now." "For now," Marcus confirmed. "Ethan, I've spent the last 90 minutes making calls. I spoke to 3 people who know this family. 3 people I trust who operate at a level where these things are common knowledge. Do you want to know what every single one of them said when I told them Claire Whitmore had just walked away from a marriage with no financial claim? What? They said they weren't surprised. They said the Whitmore family doesn't fight for money. They said the Whitmores fight for something else. What else? Marcus was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. Integrity, he said. Accountability. They don't destroy people, but they don't let people escape the truth of what they've done either. Claire walking away with nothing that's not weakness. That's the family's signature move. They don't need your money, Ethan. They need you to understand what you did. Ethan sat in the back of his car and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt small. Not professionally, not financially, not in the ways he had built so many defenses against feeling, but something deeper, the specific smallness of understanding that you have badly misjudged the room you were in, and that your misjudgment says something about you that you cannot easily dismiss. "What do I do?" he said. It was the first time in Marcus's experience that Ethan Caldwell had asked that question without any trace of performance in it, without any trace of strategy or positioning. Just the raw question of a man who didn't know the answer. Marcus took a breath. "Right now, nothing. You go home. You don't make any calls related to Northgate or 2022 or anything we discussed in that conference room. You let me assess the full exposure, and you sit with the fact that your wife, your ex-wife, is Claire Whitmore." A pause. "And maybe while you're sitting with that, you think about what it means that a woman with that name and that family and that level of access to information chose for 7 years to stay quiet. Chose to stay. She stayed because she loved me," Ethan said. He said it differently than he would have said it 2 hours ago. Less like a fact he owned, more like something he was picking up carefully, afraid it might fall apart in his hands. "Yes," Marcus said. "She did." "And yes," Marcus said again quietly. "You did." The car moved through Chicago traffic. The gray afternoon had deepened toward early evening, the light going flat and cold. Ethan watched the city pass and thought about a woman in a cream blouse sitting across a mahogany table with her hands folded completely still while he laughed at her. The laugh felt very far away now, and very close. I thought about the first time he met her. Not in the stylized way he had retold the story at dinner parties over the years. He had refined that version, made it smoother, more impressive, better suited to the narrative of his own life. He thought about the actual memory, the unpolished version. He had been at a fundraising event 7.5 years ago at the Chicago Cultural Center. He had gone primarily because a business contact was being honored, and Ethan needed the contact to feel valued. He had been standing near the back glass of wine in hand, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, calculating, cataloging, identifying who mattered and who didn't. And across the room, not near the center where the important people clustered, but off to one side, he had seen a woman standing in front of a painting, just standing there looking at it, not networking, not checking her phone, not performing appreciation for the benefit of people watching her, just genuinely looking at the painting with the complete absorption of someone who had forgotten for a moment that the rest of the room existed. He had walked over to her, not because he was interested in the painting, because he was interested in what it meant for a person to look at something that completely. "What do you see?" he had asked her. She had turned and looked at him. Dark eyes, not startled, just present. "Loneliness that looks like freedom," she'd said. "It's trying to convince you it's the same thing." He had not expected that answer. He'd expected something polite and forgettable. Instead, he'd gotten something that landed in his chest and stayed there. They had talked for 2 hours. He had missed the contact he came to see. He had not noticed until he was in the cab going home. That was who Claire had been. That was who she had been for the first year, the first 2 years, someone who said things that landed. Someone who noticed what other people walked past. Someone who looked at him in those early days like he was actually worth looking at. And somewhere between year 2 and year 3, he had stopped looking back. He hadn't chosen to stop. He hadn't made a decision. He had just gotten busy, gotten distracted, gotten successful. And the more successful he got, the easier it became to stop paying attention to the person who was always there. The person who didn't demand anything. The person who waited. She had been waiting to see if he would come back. He hadn't. The car pulled up outside the penthouse building. His driver opened the door. Ethan didn't move for a moment. "Mr. Caldwell," his driver said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Thanks, Paul." He got out. He went inside. He rode the elevator up to the penthouse that had never once in 7 years of living in it felt as empty as it did in this specific moment. He walked through the space that Claire had decorated quietly and without ever making a production of it, so that it was actually livable and actually beautiful in a way that Ethan had never thanked her for, because he had always assumed that beautiful spaces simply existed and someone produced them, and that someone was not really a person he needed to think about. Her things were already gone. Not all of them, some larger items remained, but the personal things, the small, specific things that made a space feel inhabited by a particular human being rather than a lifestyle gone. She had removed them quietly before today, which meant she had planned this carefully, which meant she had been planning it for a while. He sat down on the couch. He sat there for a long time without moving, without turning on the television, without pouring a drink, without calling anyone. He just sat. And slowly, in the quiet of an apartment that had been emptied of the specific warm weight of another person's presence, Ethan Caldwell began to understand something he had never allowed himself to understand before. The empire. He had built the reputation, the deals, the lifestyle, the version of himself that the city of Chicago believed in had been built in a house where someone was watching, someone who knew the truth behind the performance, someone who had seen the decisions and heard the phone calls and read the revision notes on documents he thought were private, someone who had chosen for years to say nothing, not because she was powerless, but because she was waiting. And now the waiting was over, and Ethan was only beginning to understand what that meant for the ground he was standing on. His phone lit up on the cushion beside him. Not Marcus, not Derek. An unknown number. He stared at it. It buzzed 3 times and stopped. Then a text message came through from the unknown number. 7 words. "I didn't want this to happen to you." He stared at the message for a long time. 7 words, and in them something that broke through the last of the armor he'd been maintaining since that conference room, because it was not a threat, it was not a warning, it was not leverage, it was something far more devastating than any of those things. It was compassion, from the woman he had laughed at, from the woman he had told she came from nothing, from the woman who could, with one phone call to her family's legal team, begin a process that would dismantle everything he had built. She had texted him to say she hadn't wanted this. Ethan set the phone down, pressed his palms against his eyes, breathed. Outside Chicago was going dark. The lights of the city came up the way they always did, indifferent and brilliant. 38 floors below, a man who had everything and had just discovered with sudden and terrible clarity that everything was not what he had thought it was. And somewhere across that city, in an office at the top of a building with no name on the outside, Gerald Whitmore was reading a report that his legal team had prepared, making notes in the margins with a plain black pen and thinking about his daughter who had loved someone the way her mother had taught her to love completely and without condition and had been given nothing back. He closed the report. He picked up his phone. He made a call, not to a lawyer, not to a financial regulator, to an old friend who ran a company that Ethan Caldwell had been trying to partner with for 3 years without success. "Charles," Gerald said when the call connected. "It's Gerald. I think it's time we had that dinner we've been postponing." A pause. "Yes, I know it's been a while. There are some things I'd like to discuss. Nothing urgent. I just think it's time you knew certain things about certain people." Another pause. "Bring your counsel. I'll bring mine." He ended the call. He set down his phone. He looked out his window at the city he had helped build quietly and without fanfare the way his family had always built things. And Gerald Whitmore allowed himself one small private moment of something that was not quite satisfaction, not yet, but was its neighbor. 3 days after the divorce was finalized, Ethan Caldwell's phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. I was already awake. He had barely slept. The penthouse that had always felt like a symbol of everything he had built now felt like a container for everything he was losing, and the silence inside it had a quality he had never noticed before, dense, specific, the silence of a space that had once held another person and now didn't. The call was from Derek Holt. Ethan picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're watching the news," Derek said. No greeting, no preamble. Derek's voice had a texture Ethan had never heard in it before. Not panic, because Derek was not someone who panicked, but something close to it. Something that lived in the same neighborhood. "I just woke up," Ethan said. "What channel?" "All of them." Ethan reached for the remote. He turned on the television. He found a financial news channel, and the first thing he saw was his own company's name on a lower thirds graphic. Caldwell Development Group, Federal Inquiry into Investor Reporting Practices. The anchor was mid-sentence, something about secondary investors in a commercial real estate project filing formal complaints with the SEC regarding material misrepresentations in quarterly disclosures. Ethan sat up slowly. When did this break? 20 minutes ago. My phone has been going since 5:30. I've got 3 investors calling me directly, Ethan. 3. They're not asking questions. They're making statements. Derek. They're saying they have documentation. Documented evidence of the revisions, the before and after versions of the March 2023 report. Derek's voice dropped lower. Where did that come from? How does anyone on the outside have that? Ethan did not answer immediately, because he knew. He knew exactly where it had come from. He had known since the moment he read those 43 pages in the conference room 3 days ago. The question was not where the documentation had come from. The question was why it had moved now this fast when Claire had told him she was holding it. "I'll call Marcus," Ethan said. "Ethan!" Derek stopped him. Something in his voice had shifted again, moved past the crisis management register and into something more personal, more direct. "I need you to tell me something, and I need the real answer, not the version you give lawyers, the real one. Ask. Is this coming from her, from the divorce?" Silence. "Ethan." "I don't know," Ethan said. It was not entirely a lie. He didn't know, not definitively. Claire had said she wasn't going to file it immediately. She had said her position hadn't changed. But 3 days had passed, and something had clearly moved, and the only person with access to that specific documentation in that specific form was the woman who had placed a 43-page report on a conference table and walked out of the room. "Derek," Ethan said carefully, "I need you to not make any statements to anyone today. Investors press nobody. Tell them you're awaiting counsel's guidance. Can you do that?" "I've been doing this for 20 years, Ethan. I know how to keep my mouth shut." A pause. "What I don't know is how to protect a company from something I didn't know was coming. I'll fix this. Can you—" Another silence, longer this time. "I'll call you back," Ethan said, and hung up. He called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the first ring, which meant Marcus had already been awake, which meant Marcus had already seen it. "I'm watching," Marcus said before Ethan could speak. "Did she file it?" "I don't know yet. The SEC inquiry could have been triggered independently. The secondary investors may have had their own concerns that predated the divorce. I'm making calls." "But you think it's connected?" "I think the timing is not coincidental, no." Marcus paused. "Ethan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not contact Claire. Do not contact anyone in the Whitmore organization. Do not make any public statements. The worst thing you can do right now is react. She told me she wasn't going to file it. She told you she wasn't going to file it immediately, that it depended on how the process went." Marcus's voice was measured. "I'm going to find out exactly what was filed by whom and when. Give me 2 hours." 2 hours. Ethan looked at the television where his company's name was still scrolling across the bottom of the screen. 2 hours of watching his life discussed on financial news by people who had no idea what was actually happening. "Fine," he said. 2 hours. He got up. He made coffee. He stood in his kitchen and drank it while the television talked about him in the third person, which was one of the more surreal experiences he had ever had, and he had had several surreal experiences in the past 72 hours. His personal phone buzzed. Not his business phone, his personal one. A text from a number he recognized, Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was the woman Ethan had been planning a future with, or telling himself he was planning a future with. She was 32, worked in private equity, and had entered Ethan's life about 18 months ago, with the particular timing of someone who appeared exactly when a marriage was quietly failing and a man was looking for confirmation that he was still worth something. She had been a secret during the marriage. She was not a secret anymore because there was nothing left to keep secret from. But she had also not made any formal acknowledgement of what she and Ethan were or were going to be in the time since he had told her the divorce was proceeding. Her text said, "Seeing the news. Are you okay? Call me." Ethan stared at the message, read it twice, set the phone down. He did not call her. He did not know exactly why he didn't call her. Some instinct, some new and unfamiliar instinct that had been growing quietly in the 3 days since the conference room told him that calling Vanessa right now would be the wrong move. Not strategically wrong, just wrong, in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. He picked up his coffee. He kept watching the news. By 9 in the morning, 2 of Caldwell Development Group's major institutional investors had issued statements that they were reviewing their positions pending the outcome of the inquiry. By 9:30, the company's stock, which had been publicly listed for 3 years, had dropped 11%. By 10:15, a third investor had requested an emergency board call for the following morning. Ethan watched all of it happen in real time from his penthouse, and the feeling it produced was unlike anything he had experienced in his professional life. He had navigated downturns before. He had navigated bad press before. He had navigated failed deals and difficult partners and negotiations that went sideways in the final hour. But those things had always happened to his company. This felt different. This felt like it was happening to him, to the specific architecture of who he believed himself to be, and that distinction which he would not have been able to articulate clearly even 2 weeks ago was now the most significant thing in his awareness. Marcus called back at 11:03. "It wasn't Claire," he said. Ethan sat up straighter. "What?" The SEC inquiry was not triggered by the Whitmore documentation. The filing came from one of your secondary investors, a firm called Meridian Capital Partners. They had their own concerns independent of anything Claire knew or shared. They hired forensic accountants 8 weeks ago. The timing with your divorce is coincidental. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. "You're sure?" "I spoke to 2 people with direct knowledge of the filing. This was entirely separate from your divorce proceedings." A pause. "Which means Claire Whitmore held that documentation, and she is still holding it even while your company is actively under inquiry. She had every opportunity to pile on. She didn't." Something moved through Ethan that he didn't have an immediate word for. Relief was part of it, but not all of it. "She still has it, though," he said. "She still has it," Marcus confirmed. "And now that the SEC inquiry is public, that documentation becomes significantly more powerful, not less. If she ever decides to share what she has with the regulatory body, it would add substantial weight to an inquiry that is already active. But she's not sharing it. Not yet." "Why?" Ethan said. And this time asking the question did not feel like frustration. It felt like genuine confusion about a person he was realizing he had never understood. "Why would she protect me after everything?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I don't think she's protecting you, Ethan. I think she's doing what she said she was going to do. She's waiting to see how the rest of the process goes." "What process?" "The divorce is finalized." "The process of you understanding what you did," Marcus said. And then, because he was a professional, and professionals did not editorialize in their billable hours, he stopped himself. "That's my read. I could be wrong. What I can tell you factually is that the Whitmore family's legal team has been in contact with my office this morning." Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. "Saying what?" "Saying that Claire's position remains unchanged. She is not interested in additional litigation. She is not interested in financial compensation. And she is specifically not interested in using the documentation she holds as a weapon." A pause. "But she is watching." Watching. The word settled on Ethan the way a hand settles on a shoulder gently but with unmistakable weight. She was watching. The way she had always been watching, apparently, for 7 years, while he made phone calls in his home office and revised investor reports, and told himself that the quiet woman in the other room was simply not the kind of person who paid attention to things like that. "What do I do?" Ethan asked. It was the second time in 3 days he had asked Marcus that question with no trace of performance in it. "You handle the inquiry," Marcus said. "You get ahead of it. You cooperate. You don't compound the existing problems with new ones." A beat. "And personally, Ethan, I'm saying this as someone who has worked with you for 8 years and would like to continue working with you. You spend some time thinking about the difference between what you owe your investors and what you owe yourself." Ethan sat with that for a moment. "Those sound like the same thing." "They're not," Marcus said simply, and ended the call. By noon, Ethan had spoken to his board chairman, his CFO, and his head of communications. The board call was scheduled for the following morning. Legal was preparing a response to the SEC's initial information request. The communications team had drafted 3 different public statements, ranging from aggressive pushback to full cooperative transparency, and was waiting for Ethan's direction on which register to take. Ethan told them to hold all 3. He sat in his home office, the same office where he had made the phone calls, where he had done the revisions, where he had existed in the false security of a man who believed that a closed door meant no one was listening. And he looked at the 3 draft statements on his laptop screen and felt nothing that resembled certainty about any of them. His phone buzzed again. Vanessa calling this time. He stared at her name on the screen. Let it ring. It went to voicemail. She called again 30 seconds later. He let that one go too. On the 3rd call he picked up. Ethan. Her voice was warm, concerned, and immediately in a way he had never noticed before, slightly performative in both of those qualities. I've been watching the news all morning. This is insane. Tell me what's happening. It's complicated, he said. Is it the divorce? Did she do this? Did she leak something? No, he said. It wasn't her. A pause. Are you sure? Because it seems like, Vanessa, it wasn't her. He said it more firmly. The inquiry is independent. She had nothing to do with it. Another pause. This one felt different from the first one. More calculated, though he might have been reading that in retroactively. Well, either way, you need to get in front of this. Have you talked to your PR people? Because the way this is being framed on the financial channels is really not... I'm handling it, he said. I know you are. I just think that you should consider getting someone in front of the cameras today before the narrative sets. My firm has a crisis communications contact who is absolutely... I said I'm handling it, Vanessa. Silence. Okay, she said. Her voice had shifted, almost imperceptibly cooled by maybe 2 degrees, which was so slight that a few weeks ago he would not have registered it at all. Okay, I'm just trying to help. I know you are, he said. I'll call you tonight. He ended the call. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, and he thought about the difference between the phone call he had just had and the text message he had received 3 days ago from an unknown number. 7 words. I didn't want this to happen to you. Vanessa had called 3 times in a row. She had led immediately with how the news looked. She had referenced her firm's contacts. She had, in the space of 90 seconds, made a crisis that was happening to Ethan feel slightly like an opportunity she was thinking about adjacent to him. He had not noticed this quality in her before, or he had noticed it and had not allowed himself to name it. He put his phone face down on the desk. He opened a drawer. In the back of the drawer, behind folders and contracts and a flashlight he had never used, was a photograph. He had not put it in the drawer. It had been in the drawer when he moved in, when this was his office, and also Claire's before it became purely his, as she retreated quietly from spaces he occupied. He had never moved it, which meant some part of him had been leaving it there on purpose, without acknowledging that he was doing it. He took it out. It was a photo from about 5 years ago. Not a professional photo, not one of the posed charity event photographs that covered an entire wall of the living room. Just a snapshot taken by someone at a dinner party on their phone and sent to Claire, who had printed it and framed it in a small, simple frame. The 2 of them at a dinner table mid-conversation, neither of them looking at the camera. Claire was laughing at something Ethan had said, and Ethan was watching her laugh with an expression on his face that he did not fully recognize because he had not been aware of wearing it when the photo was taken. He looked like a man who loved someone. Not performed love. Not the kind of love you displayed at charity functions where people were watching. The undefended kind. The kind you didn't know you were showing. He looked at the photo for a long time. Then he set it on the desk where he could see it face up, and he started working. Not on the crisis communications, not on the board call preparation. He opened a blank document on his laptop and he started writing. No particular purpose, no audience. He just started writing down what he remembered, the timeline of how things had changed, when the compliments became criticism, when he had stopped asking about her day because he assumed her day was less important than his, when he had started looking through her at dinner parties instead of at her, when he had stopped being curious about who she was because he had decided quietly and without fanfare that he already knew. He wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. When he stopped, he read it back. It was not comfortable reading. It was the account of a man who had taken someone's love and converted it slowly and without intention, but with absolute consistency, into something that served him. Who had used a person's quiet nature as permission to ignore them. who had mistaken silence for contentment and dependence for loyalty, and had never not once in 7 years asked the woman across his dinner table what she actually needed. He closed the document without saving it, not because he didn't want to remember it, but because he didn't need a document to remember it. It was already inside him now, and he understood with the strange clarity of someone who has just seen something they cannot unsee that it would stay there. His board chairman called at 2 p.m. His name was Robert Klein, 70 years old, the kind of establishment figure who wore the same style of suit he had worn for 40 years, and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had navigated every kind of corporate storm and survived all of them by never losing his composure. "Ethan," Robert said, "I've spent the morning reviewing what the SEC has been sent and speaking to our counsel. I want to have an honest conversation with you before tomorrow's board call." "Of course," Ethan said. "The Northgate project," Robert said. "Walk me through it, the real version." Ethan took, and then for the first time in the quiet of his home office, with a photograph on the desk and a blank document on his screen, he did something he had not done in a very long time. I told the truth. All of it. The decisions he had made, the representations that were optimistic in ways that exceeded what the actual data supported. The revisions to the March 2023 report that smoothed out numbers that should not have been smoothed. Not because he was a criminal, he didn't think of himself that way, and in the literal legal sense, the question was genuinely complex, but because he had made choices at the margin of acceptable that he had told himself were normal and that he now understood were not. Robert listened without interrupting. The silence on the phone during Ethan's account was the silence of a man who was hearing something he had suspected and was now confirming. When Ethan finished, Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me that," he said. Ethan said nothing. "I want you to know something," Robert continued. "In 40 years of corporate governance, the men who came out the other side of crises like this intact, not just professionally, but as people, were the ones who got honest fast. Not just with regulators, with themselves." A pause. The ones who didn't, the ones who spent all their energy on defense and narrative management and making sure they were never actually accountable, they won sometimes, in the short term. But I've watched enough of them to know that winning without accountability is a very specific kind of loss. Ethan pressed his lips together, said nothing. "Tomorrow's board call," Robert said. "I'm going to recommend full cooperation with the inquiry, full disclosure, proactive communication to investors, and a commitment to a third-party audit of the past 3 years. That's going to be painful. It's going to cost you." A pause. "But it's going to be real. And right now, Ethan, I think real is the only thing that actually helps you." After he hung up with Robert, Ethan sat in his home office and did something he had not done since he was a young man, with none of the things he had spent his life accumulating. He sat with uncertainty and did not try to manage it. He did not call anyone. He did not draft a message. He did not construct a strategy or a narrative or a response to the narrative. He just sat in the quiet of a home that felt very empty and very honest simultaneously, and he let the uncertainty be what it was. His phone buzzed at 4:17, an unknown number different from the one that had texted him 3 days ago. He picked up. "Mr. Caldwell." The voice was a man's, older, measured in the way of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be taken seriously. "My name is Gerald Whitmore. I think it's time we spoke." The name arrived in Ethan's chest like a stone dropping into deep water, not splashing, just sinking, sending ripples outward in every direction. Claire's father. "Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said. His voice stayed controlled. He was proud of that. "I wasn't expecting your call." "No," Gerald said. "I imagine not." A brief pause. "I want to be clear about something before we begin. This call is not adversarial. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm not calling on behalf of my legal team or to discuss any regulatory matters. I'm calling because I am a father, and I want to talk to the man my daughter spent 7 years of her life with." Ethan had not expected that. Of all the things Gerald Whitmore might have said, that was the one he had not prepared for. "All right," Ethan said carefully. "I want to ask you one question," Gerald said, "and I want you to think before you answer it. Take as long as you need." "Okay." "Did you know she was unhappy?" Ethan sat very still. The question was simple. The answer was not. He thought about the honest account he had written on the blank document 40 minutes ago. He thought about the photograph on his desk. He thought about the way Claire had said in a conference room 3 days ago that she had spent 4 years trying to reach him. He took Gerald's advice and thought before he answered. "Yes," he said finally. "I knew. I told myself I didn't, but I knew." The silence on the other end of the line was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of a man who had expected something else and was recalibrating. "That's an honest answer," Gerald said. "It's the right one," Ethan said. "It is," Gerald agreed. It took courage to say it. A beat. "I want to tell you something about my daughter, not to make you feel worse than you already do, but because I think you deserve to understand who it is you were married to." "Please," Ethan said and meant it. "Claire has known her own worth since she was a child," Gerald said. "Not the Whitmore worth, not the financial worth, her own worth, who she is, what she notices, how she moves through the world." His voice carried something that was not sentimentality, but was its quieter, more resilient cousin. "When she told me she'd met someone and that she wasn't going to tell him her name, I mean her real name, her family, I told her I thought it was a mistake. I told her that love built on incomplete information was a fragile thing." A pause. "She told me that love built on complete information was a test, not a choice. She wanted someone to choose her." Ethan closed his eyes. "She chose you," Gerald said. "For 7 years she chose you, even when it was costing her something, even when it would have been easier to leave." "I know," Ethan said. The words were almost without volume. "I'm not calling to ask you to do anything," Gerald said. "I'm not calling to extract an apology or negotiate terms or make anything easier for my family's legal position. I'm calling because my daughter texted you 3 days ago and told you she didn't want this to happen to you." A pause. "And when she told me she'd done that, I thought that man deserves to know at minimum what kind of person sent that message." Ethan was quiet for a long time. "The kind," he said finally, "that I didn't deserve." Gerald Whitmore said nothing for a moment. Then, "You might surprise yourself, Ethan. People do." A pause. "Take care of yourself. Handle your business with integrity. That's all I called to say." The line went quiet. Ethan held the phone for a long time after. Outside, the day was moving toward evening. The city below was doing what it always did, indifferent to the specific human weight being carried 42 floors above its streets. Somewhere in that city, in an office at the top of a building with no name on the outside, a woman named Claire was making decisions about her future with the specific freedom of someone who had finally stopped waiting for someone else to give them permission. And in a penthouse that had never felt more like exactly what it was, a collection of expensive things in a large space amounting to something considerably less than a life. Ethan Caldwell set his phone down on his desk next to the photograph of a man watching a woman laugh. He looked at that photograph. He thought about Gerald's words. People do surprise themselves. Then he picked up his laptop, opened a new document, and began to write something that was not a press statement, and not a strategic memo, and not a response to a regulatory inquiry. He began to write a letter. Not to Claire. He understood with a clarity that had cost him everything to acquire that there were things he did not have the right to say to Claire. Not now. Maybe not ever. The door he had closed by not seeing her was not a door he could simply reopen by acknowledging he'd closed it. He wrote the letter to himself. He wrote about what he had built and what he had broken. He wrote about the difference between success and worth. He wrote about the specific cruelty of being good at acquiring things and blind to the people who mattered. He wrote about a woman who had sat across conference tables and charity dinner tables and breakfast tables from him for 7 years, paying attention, waiting, hoping, and finally with a dignity that still made his chest hurt when he thought about it walking away. He wrote until the city outside went fully dark, and the apartment was lit only by his laptop screen. Then he closed the document, saved it this time, and somewhere in the act of saving it, of committing to having written it, of allowing it to exist as a thing that was true and recorded, something shifted in Ethan Caldwell. Not repaired, not resolved, nothing that dramatic, just shifted. The way things shift at the very beginning of a long and necessary journey that a person has been avoiding and is now finally choosing to begin. Tomorrow, there would be a board call. There would be regulatory responses and investor communications and press statements and every exhausting mechanism of a public crisis being managed. There would be consequences, real and significant consequences, for decisions he had made. But tonight, in the quiet of a penthouse that finally felt accurately empty rather than falsely full, Ethan Caldwell sat with the truth of what he had done and what he had lost, and he did not run from it. It was the most honest he had been in years, and it was, though he did not know this yet, the most important thing he would do all week. The board call happened at 9 in the morning, and it lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Ethan knew going in that it would be bad. Robert Klein had prepared him for bad. Marcus had prepared him for bad. His own honest accounting of the Northgate decisions, the one he had given Robert on the phone the afternoon before, had prepared him for bad. What he had not been fully prepared for was the specific texture of sitting in a room, even a virtual one, while people he had worked alongside for years asked him questions in the careful language of people who were trying to determine whether they still trusted him, and understanding with complete clarity that the honest answer to most of those questions was going to cost him something real. He answered every question directly. No softening, no strategic reframing, no instinct toward the version of events that made him look best. Robert had said that real was the only thing that actually helped him, and Ethan had decided somewhere in the quiet of the night before to believe that. By noon, 3 things had been decided. Caldwell Development Group would engage in full proactive cooperation with the SEC inquiry. An independent third-party audit of the past 3 years of financial reporting would commence immediately, and Ethan would step back from his day-to-day operational role while the audit was underway, not a forced resignation. Robert was careful to frame it, but a voluntary recusal that demonstrated the company's commitment to uncompromised review. Step back. 2 words. Very clean, very professional, completely devastating. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his home office for a long time without moving. The laptop was open in front of him. The board call window closed the screen, now showing only his desktop background, a photograph of the Chicago skyline at night that he had set years ago and never changed. He had built this company over 15 years. He had poured everything into it, his time, his energy, his attention, and if he was being as honest as he had committed to being, the attention that should have gone elsewhere. The attention that a different version of him would have given to the person across the dinner table. He had traded his marriage for his company, and now he was losing both. His phone was on the desk beside him. It had been buzzing intermittently since the board call ended. Derek, 2 other executives, his communications director, a journalist from a financial publication who had somehow gotten his personal number. He ignored all of them. At 12:47, Vanessa called. He looked at her name on the screen. He thought about what Marcus had said 3 days ago, that the men who came out of crises intact were the ones who got honest fast. He thought about what Gerald Whitmore had said about Claire choosing him, about the photograph on his desk, about 7 words from an unknown number. "I didn't want this to happen to you." He picked up. "Ethan." Vanessa's voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who understood that warmth was currency. "I heard about the board decision. Stepping back, that's so unfair. You built that company." "It was the right call," he said. A pause. "You don't have to be noble about it." "I'm not being noble. It was the right call." He said it again, and it felt different the second time, more settled. Another pause, longer. "Ethan, I've been thinking. About us. About where things go from here. Because I know the timing has been strange with the divorce and now this, but I think if we're going to be serious about a future together, we need to start making that more visible. Publicly. It would actually help your image right now to—" "Vanessa," he said. She stopped. "I think we need to talk," he said. "In person. Not today, but soon." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a person who has heard something they were not expecting and is deciding very rapidly how to respond to it. "That sounds serious," she said. Her voice had shifted, not to hurt, not to vulnerability, but to something strategic. He heard it clearly for the first time, that faint strategic quality underneath everything she said. "It is," he said. "We'll talk soon." He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand and felt something he had not expected to feel. Not relief exactly, but a kind of clarity. The same clarity that had been arriving in pieces since the conference room, assembling itself slowly into something he could actually see. His business phone rang. He answered it because he still had responsibilities that didn't pause for personal reckonings. It was his CFO, a careful woman named Linda Park, who had been with the company for 9 years and who Ethan had always respected precisely because she never told him what he wanted to hear. "I've been through the audit prep materials," Linda said. "There are things we need to discuss before the external auditors come in." "Tell me." "The 2022 Northgate partnership structures," she said. the way the investor representations were written. I need you to understand, Ethan, that there is a version of this that is a documentation error and a version that is something else. And the distinction is going to matter very much to the people reviewing it. Which version is it? Ethan asked. A pause. That depends on what you can tell me about the intent behind the drafting. He took a breath. Set up a meeting with me and Marcus for this afternoon. We're going to go through all of it. Everything. The real version. Linda was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said carefully. Okay, Ethan, I'll set it up. After he hung up, he stood and walked to the window. The city below was moving through its afternoon people going places, doing things, carrying their own weights that were invisible from 42 floors up. He had always loved this view, had always felt standing at this window like a man who was above things in the best possible sense, elevated, successful, looking out over something he had earned. It looked different now, not smaller, just more honest. A city full of people, including him, navigating the gap between who they were and who they wanted to be. The meeting with Linda and Marcus lasted 3 hours. Ethan told them everything, all of the Northgate details, all of the 2022 decisions, the specific conversations that had happened, and the specific reasoning that had been used at the time, which had felt defensible in the moment, and felt very different in the current light. By the time they finished, Marcus had revised his assessment of the legal exposure upward, and Linda had a very precise and very uncomfortable expression on her face. But both of them in different ways said the same thing, getting ahead of this, cooperating fully, being the first, rather than the last person to tell the truth about it, that mattered. It doesn't eliminate the consequences, Marcus said, but it shapes what kind of consequences we're talking about. I know, Ethan said. Are you sure you want to do it this way? Marcus said. Because I can build a defense, a real one. It would be contested and expensive and— No, Ethan said. We do it the honest way. Marcus studied his client for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was not quite surprise and not quite respect, but lived somewhere between the two. All right, he said. After they left, Ethan ordered food he didn't eat and sat in the silence of his penthouse and tried to think about what the next 6 months of his life would look like. The audit would take time. The SEC process would take time. Rebuilding anything professionally, personally, internally would take time. He had never been particularly good at time, at patience, at the slow work of allowing something to develop instead of forcing it into the shape he needed it to be. I was going to have to learn. His personal phone buzzed at 7:15 in the evening. A name he recognized but hadn't spoken to in years, Tom Garrett. They had been close in their mid-20s before Ethan's career had accelerated to the point where people from his earlier life seemed to fall away, naturally replaced by people who operated at the level Ethan was climbing toward. He answered mostly out of surprise. I saw the news, Tom said. His voice was the same as it had been 15 years ago, easy, unpolished, the voice of someone who had never learned to perform himself and had therefore never needed to unlearn it. You doing okay? Not particularly, Ethan said honestly. Yeah. A short pause. I figured. Another pause, not uncomfortable. You want to get a beer? Ethan almost laughed. In the middle of a regulatory inquiry, a step back from his own company, and the complete dismantling of the life he had spent 15 years constructing, Tom Garrett was asking if he wanted to get a beer. Yeah, Ethan said. Actually, yeah, I do. They met at a bar in Lincoln Park that had not changed since the 90s and had no interest in changing. Dark Not Loud, the kind of place where people actually talk to each other, rather than performing talking at each other. Ethan had not been in a bar like this in years. His bars were hotel bars and private clubs, and the kind of establishment where the drinks cost $40 and arrived with an unnecessary garnish. This bar cost $9 a beer, and the bartender called everyone Buddy, regardless of who they were. Tom was already there when Ethan arrived. He looked the same as he always had, a little heavier, a little grayer at the temples, the kind of face that had been through normal amounts of life and wore it without apology. They shook hands, sat down. The bartender put 2 beers in front of them. So, Tom said, the whole thing fell apart. Yeah, Ethan said. The company and the marriage at the same time, more or less. Tom nodded slowly, drank his beer. That's a lot. It is. You want to talk about it or you want to just drink a beer? Ethan looked at him, thought about how many conversations he'd had in the past week with lawyers, board members, executives, a CFO with a careful expression, and how all of them required him to be some version of managed and deliberate. Both, he said. So he talked. Not the way he had talked to Marcus or Robert or Linda, not the version where he was managing his exposure or shaping his account. The version where it was just the facts of what had happened and how he felt about them, which was a version he had not yet told to anyone in full. He told Tom about the conference room, about Claire's name, about the 43 pages, about the board call and the step back and the audit, about the text message with 7 words. Tom listened without interrupting, which was something Ethan had forgotten was possible in a conversation. When Ethan finished, Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I say something that you might not want to hear?" "Apparently, that's what everyone's been doing this week," Ethan said. "Go ahead." "You knew she was unhappy," Tom said. "Not accusatory, just factual." "You said that yourself?" "Yes." "And you let it go on?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan turned his beer glass slowly on the bar. "Because it was easier than changing. Because I was good at what I did professionally, and I had stopped being good at what I was supposed to do personally, and it was easier to invest where I was getting returns." He paused. "And because some part of me believed she would always be there, that she needed me. And she didn't." "No," Ethan said. "She really didn't." Tom nodded. "I've been married for 12 years, he said, "and I think the most dangerous thing in a marriage is comfort. Not the good kind, the lazy kind. The kind where you stop trying because you think the other person isn't going anywhere." He looked at Ethan. "People go, Ethan. Even the patient ones. Especially the patient ones, because when they decide to leave, they've already made peace with it long before you find out." Ethan sat with that for a moment. "She made peace with it a long time before that conference room," he said. "Sounds like it." "And I was the last to know." "You were the only one who didn't know," Tom corrected gently. They sat in the bar for 2 more hours. They talked about other things too. Tom's kids a house. He was renovating a fishing trip he'd taken last summer. Normal things. The texture of a life that was built at a normal scale and was therefore actually livable in a way that Ethan's life had never quite been. When they left, standing on the sidewalk outside, Tom shook Ethan's hand. "Whatever comes next," Tom said, "just be honest about it, all the way through, even when it costs you." "That seems to be the emerging consensus," Ethan said. Tom smiled. "Smart people, you know. They're all saying the same thing. Maybe worth listening to." Walking back to where his driver was waiting, Ethan passed a park. He slowed down, stopped. Lincoln Park, where he had met Claire, where they had sat on a bench and talked for 4 hours without noticing the time. He had not been back here intentionally. The route just happened. The city arranged itself this way, and suddenly he was standing 100 feet from a park bench where a version of himself that he barely recognized anymore had been genuinely happy without knowing it. He stood there for a minute, maybe 2. Then he kept walking. The next 3 weeks moved fast and slow simultaneously. Fast in the external sense, the audit kicked off. The SEC inquiry generated documentation requests that consumed enormous amounts of legal bandwidth. 2 board members resigned citing reputational concerns, and Caldwell Development Group's stock continued its downward adjustment. Fast in the sense that one consequence led to another, and the architecture of what Ethan had built was visibly shifting under its own weight. Slow in the internal sense, because something was happening inside Ethan that didn't move at the pace of corporate crises. It moved at the pace of the kind of change that only happens when a person has been stripped of the things they used to avoid themselves with. He stopped going to the kinds of events he had always attended, not because he was hiding, but because he genuinely didn't want to be in those rooms anymore. The charity functions and business dinners and private club evenings that had made up the social geography of his life for a decade felt now like elaborate ways of performing a version of himself that he was no longer interested in maintaining. He started doing things he hadn't done in years. He ran in the mornings not on a treadmill in a luxury gym, but outside in the actual weather, which in Chicago in November was a commitment requiring either genuine desire or considerable stubbornness, and Ethan was developing both. He called his mother, who he had spoken to only 4 times in the past year, and who had said nothing when he'd called to tell her about the divorce except, "I know, sweetheart," which he understood only in retrospect meant that she had seen it coming from further away than he had. He had lunch with Robert Klein, not a board. Lunch, not a strategy meeting, just lunch between 2 people who had something real to talk about. Robert told him about his own early career, a period of decisions he had made that had nearly ended everything, and the specific quality of the lesson learned from that near miss. He told Ethan that the difference between a failure that teaches you something and a failure that just ends things is almost entirely determined by what you do in the first 30 days. "You're doing the right things," Robert said. "Keep doing them even when you stop feeling the urgency." "What do you mean? The urgency fades," Robert said simply. "The crisis gets manageable and the pressure lifts a little, and the temptation comes back. The temptation to go back to the old ways because the old ways are comfortable." He looked at Ethan directly. "The people who actually change don't do it because of the crisis. They do it in spite of the resolution." Ethan thought about that for a long time after. 19 days after the board call, Vanessa called and asked to meet. They met at a restaurant that was her choice, the kind of place Ethan had always preferred, the kind of room that made a statement about the people in it. He noticed that he noticed it, which he would not have noticed 3 weeks ago. She was already seated when he arrived. She looked the way she always looked, composed, attractive, entirely in command of her presentation. They ordered. They made small talk with the specific thinness of people who both know the conversation they're actually having is underneath the one they're doing. Then Vanessa set her fork down. "I've been patient," she said, "with everything that's been happening, and I think that deserves acknowledgement." "It does," Ethan said. "I've been grateful for the space." "I'm not sure I was giving you space so much as giving you time to figure out what you wanted." She looked at him directly. "Have you—" "I think so," he said. And he set his own fork down. He looked at her across the table, really looked at her, the way he had looked at very few people in his life with any sustained honesty, and he said the thing that had been forming for 3 weeks and was now ready to be said. "I don't think we're right for each other, Vanessa. Not in the way I need to be with someone right now. Not in the way I think you need to." She didn't flinch. That was the thing about Vanessa, she had very good control. "What does that mean, right for each other?" "It means that what we built was exciting," he said carefully, "and real in its way, but it was built on versions of ourselves that we were performing, not who we actually are when no one's watching." He paused. "And I think I need to spend some time getting reacquainted with who I actually am when no one's watching." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, not heartbreak, not devastation, but a kind of recalculation, which told him more about the truth of what they had been to each other than anything else could have. "Is this about her?" she said. "About Claire?" "It's about me," he said. "That's the honest answer. It's about understanding that I spent a long time being very good at things that didn't actually matter, and the cost of that was someone who did matter." He looked at his hands. "I'm not trying to get her back. I don't have that right. But I do need to become someone who would have deserved her, not for her sake, for mine." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. "You've changed," she said, not with warmth and not with coldness, just as an observation. "I'm trying to," he said. They finished dinner with the careful politeness of two people who have said the true things and are now in the civilized aftermath of them. When it was over, they said goodbye outside the restaurant in the November cold, and it was final in the way that endings are when both people know their endings and neither one pretends otherwise. He walked to his car alone. He called Marcus from the back seat. Not about the SEC inquiry, not about the audit, not about any of the ongoing professional matters that were consuming most of his waking hours. "I want to do something," he said. "I want to put together a fund, not Caldwell Development, something separate, something new. A foundation focused on first-generation entrepreneurs. Young people building things without networks, without family money, without the kind of access I had." He paused. "I want to use what I know to help people who don't have what I had." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant undertaking while everything else is ongoing." "I'm not launching it tomorrow. I'm thinking about it. I'm asking if it's viable." "The legal structure is straightforward," Marcus said carefully. "The financial commitment is the question." "I have assets that aren't tied to the company," Ethan said. "Personal assets that have nothing to do with the inquiry, not Whitmore level, but enough to start something real." Marcus was quiet for another moment. "Can I ask what brought this on?" Ethan thought about Tom in the bar in Lincoln Park, about Robert's lunch, about a woman who had looked at a painting at an art fundraiser and said loneliness that looks like freedom, about a man who ran a company from a building with no name on the outside and had called not to threaten him but to tell him something true. "A lot of things," he said. "I've been listening to people who know more than me." "That," Marcus said slowly, "is possibly the most significant change I've observed in you in 8 years." Ethan almost laughed. "Don't get used to it." But he was smiling when he said it. And the smile was the new kind, not the performance, not the room-filling confidence display. Something quieter, something that came from the inside out instead of the outside in. He got home late. He went to his home office. The photograph was still on the desk where he had placed it weeks ago, and he had stopped removing it because he had started understanding that keeping it visible was not self-punishment. It was a reminder of what he was capable of when he was actually present, of what it looked like when he let someone in instead of managing them from a distance. He sat at his desk. He opened the document he had saved, the honest accounting of himself, the one he had written in the dark, and he added to it. Not new confessions, new intentions, specific, concrete, realistic intentions about what being a different kind of person actually looked like in practice day by day. He wrote for an hour. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his home office, the office where the decisions had been made, where the phone calls had happened, where a woman in the kitchen down the hall had listened and said nothing for years. I was going to have to leave this apartment. He knew that. This space was a monument to a version of himself. He was in the process of stepping away from, and you couldn't truly step away from something while living inside it. He would find somewhere smaller, somewhere that fit the life he was actually living rather than the life he had been performing. But not tonight. Tonight he sat in the office and he breathed, and he allowed himself for the first time in all of this a moment of something that was neither guilt nor grief nor the complicated mathematics of consequence, something that might with time become something like hope. His phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number, the same one that had sent him 7 words 3 weeks ago. He opened it. 1 sentence. "I heard you're cooperating fully with the inquiry. I think that took real courage." He read it 3 times. He did not know how she knew. He could guess the Whitmore family had resources he could barely imagine, and the SEC inquiry was not entirely private in its early stages. But the how mattered less than the what. Less than the fact that she was still watching, still paying attention, still in some way that he could not fully name and did not want to name too quickly, still invested in what he became. He typed back 2 words. "Thank you, Claire." He set the phone down. Outside Chicago was doing what it always did, enormous, indifferent, brilliant with its own lights. And in an apartment 42 floors above it, a man who had laughed because he thought someone had nothing sat quietly in the office where he had once believed he was invisible and understood with the specific humility of someone who has paid a very high price for clarity that being seen was not a threat. It was the only thing that had ever actually mattered. 2 words. "Thank you, Claire." She read them sitting at her desk at 11:30 at night, her office quiet, the building around her, settled into that specific hush that comes after everyone else has gone home. She read them twice, set her phone face down on her desk, picked it up again, read them a 3rd time. Then she put the phone in her bag, closed her laptop, and sat in the quiet for a long moment with her hands folded in front of her, the same way she had sat across a conference table from him 6 weeks ago, completely still, completely composed. But her eyes were bright in a way that no one was there to see. She was not going to call him back. She was not going to respond. 2 words were enough, more than enough, because what those 2 words told her was not about Ethan. It was about herself. It confirmed something she had needed confirmed since the moment she walked out of that conference room, that what she had done was right. Not just legally, not just strategically, but right in the way that decisions are right when they come from the truest part of a person rather than the most defended part. She drove home through Chicago at midnight, the city doing its late-night version of itself, quieter, more honest. Somehow the way people get when the performance of the day is over and they're just moving through space trying to get somewhere. She thought about what her father had said weeks ago, that love built on incomplete information was fragile, and what she had said back, that love built on complete information was a test, not a choice. She still believed that. But sitting in her car at midnight, 6 weeks out from the conference room, she also understood something she hadn't fully understood when she'd said it. That the courage required to love someone without your armor on, without your last name, your family's wealth, your safety net was real and significant. But the courage required to walk away when that love was not returned in kind was a different kind of courage entirely. Harder in some ways, quieter. the kind no one applauds you for because it looks from the outside like you're doing nothing. She had not done nothing. She had chosen herself, and she was still learning week by week what that actually meant in practice. The next morning, she had a 7 o'clock breakfast with a woman named Diana Chen, who ran one of Chicago's most respected nonprofit organizations focused on educational access for first-generation college students. They had been introduced through a mutual contact 3 months ago, and what had begun as a professional conversation about the Whitmore Foundation's grant-making priorities had developed into something Claire was increasingly interested in personally. Diana was 53, compact and direct, with the energy of someone who had been fighting for things her entire life and had gotten very efficient at it. "I want to talk to you about something specific," Diana said, before they had even ordered coffee. "A program model we've been developing. Direct mentorship pairing between established professionals and students from underserved communities. Not just financial support, actual time, actual relationships." She looked at Claire directly. "I want to know if you'd consider being personally involved, not just the foundation, you." Claire looked at her. "What does personally involved mean?" "1 student per year, direct mentor. You meet with them regularly, you help them navigate the professional world, you introduce them to people, you answer their calls when they have questions that feel too small to ask anyone else." Diana picked up her coffee. "It sounds simple. It's not. It requires something that most wealthy people find surprisingly difficult." "What's that?" Claire asked. "Presence," Diana said simply. "Actual sustained presence. Not a check, not a speech at a gala, just being there consistently for someone who doesn't have what you have." Claire sat with that word. Presence. She had spent 7 years in a marriage where the other person was physically there and emotionally absent, and she understood with visceral specificity what the difference was between presence and proximity. "Yes," she said, "I'm in." Diana smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had expected to have to work harder for that. "Yes." "Good. I'll send you the profiles this week. You pick who you want to work with." After breakfast, Claire went to her office and found a message from her father asking her to call when she had a moment. She called from her desk before she'd opened anything else, because when Gerald Whitmore asked you to call, you called. "I had lunch with Charles Ferris yesterday," her father said. Charles Ferris was the man Gerald had called the night of the divorce, the old friend who ran the company Ethan had been trying to partner with for 3 years. "How was it?" Claire asked. "Productive," her father said carefully. "He asked about Ethan." Claire was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Gerald said. "That Ethan Caldwell made serious mistakes professionally and personally. That he is now, as far as I can tell, trying to correct both. That I don't know yet whether the correction is real or whether it's the kind of performance that smart people put on when they understand they're being watched." A pause. "And that I was reserving judgment." "That's fair," Claire said. "Charles is also reserving judgment," Gerald said, "which means the door isn't open, but it isn't locked." Another pause. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly." "Always," she said. "Do you want that door to be locked?" he asked. "Because I will make that call. If you tell me you want that door locked, I will close it permanently, and we will never speak of Ethan Caldwell again." Claire was quiet for a long moment. She thought about a man sitting in a conference room with a folder in his hands, going still, for the first time she had ever seen him truly go still. She thought about 7 words. She thought about a text 6 weeks later, 2 words back, and what it had cost him probably to send something that small and that exposed. "No," she said. "Don't lock it. Let it be what it is." Gerald was quiet. Then, "Okay." "I'm not protecting him, Dad," she said. "I'm just not punishing him indefinitely for being exactly who I knew he was when I married him." A pause. "I knew who he was. I thought I could love him into being better. That was my mistake, too." Her father didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Your mother used to say that the most honest thing a person can do after a relationship ends is own their own part in how it went." "I know," Claire said. "She was right." "She usually was," Gerald said quietly. After she hung up, Claire stood at her office window, not looking at the city in any meaningful way, just standing there in the specific way of a person whose body needs a moment while her mind works through something. She was 34 years old. She had just ended a 7-year marriage. She was running the Whitmore Foundation's programming division, which was meaningful work she was genuinely good at. She had just agreed to mentor a first-generation college student. She was by most external measures someone whose life was going well, and she was lonely. Not the devastating kind of lonely, not the kind she had felt in the last years of her marriage, which was the specific loneliness of being alone inside a relationship. This was cleaner, more honest. The loneliness of a person who is between things and knows it, who has space around them that has not yet been filled by what comes next. She sat back down at her desk. She had work to do. She did it. 6 weeks later, 11 weeks after the conference room, Ethan Caldwell stood in an empty storefront in Pilsen, a Chicago neighborhood he had driven through many times over the years and had never spent any real time in. He was with a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who ran a small community development organization that worked with local entrepreneurs. The foundation, he was building the one he had called Marcus about, from the back of a car after dinner with Vanessa, was getting its legs. It was not called Caldwell anything. He had decided early that naming it after himself was precisely the wrong impulse, the old impulse, the impulse that was about legacy rather than service. He had named it something simple and descriptive, the Open Door Fund. Rosa was showing him a space that 3 young entrepreneurs, 2 sisters and their childhood friend, were hoping to turn into a shared workshop and retail space for their respective businesses. They made handmade furniture, custom ceramics, and alterations and tailoring. 3 small businesses that had no access to conventional startup capital because they had no collateral, no credit history long enough for a bank, and no network of people who wrote checks for ideas that sounded promising. The space needed work. It was raw, unfinished, and currently home to approximately 700 square feet of possibility and several years of dust. Ethan walked through it with Rosa and listened while she explained the business plans, the community support, the realistic projections that were modest in scale and completely honest in their assumptions. He asked questions, not the performance of questions, not due diligence theater, but actual questions born of actual curiosity about whether this would work and what it would need to work. Rosa answered every question directly. She did not sell him on it. She presented it the way a person presents something they believe in without needing permission to believe in it. "What do they need?" Ethan asked. "To get the space ready, about $40,000 in renovation. Beyond that, they need someone who can help them navigate the licensing process, the supplier relationships, the basic business infrastructure that most people in their position have no one to explain to them." She looked at him. "Money is the easy part, honestly. The harder part is having someone in their corner who has done this before and will pick up the phone when they call." Ethan nodded slowly, looked around the empty space. "What are their names?" Rosa told him. "Maria and Sophia Reyes and their friend James Park." "When can I meet them?" he asked. Rosa looked at him carefully. In her experience, people who came to look at community investment opportunities asked about returns, about visibility, about what the press opportunity looked like. She had not yet met anyone who asked to meet the entrepreneurs before they asked about anything else. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," Ethan confirmed. He drove away from Pilsen differently than he had driven away from anything in a long time. Not with the satisfaction of a deal closed or a negotiation won. With something quieter, something that had to do with being useful rather than successful, which were not the same thing, and which he was only now at 36 years old understanding were not the same thing. His phone rang. "Marcus." "The SEC has made a preliminary determination," Marcus said. He paused in the specific way that attorneys pause when they are about to deliver something significant. "They're recommending a civil settlement, no criminal referral." Ethan let out a breath he had been holding for 11 weeks. "What are the terms?" "Significant financial penalties, a 2-year bar from serving as an officer or director of a public company, and a requirement for enhanced compliance training which is fairly standard." Marcus paused again. "Ethan, given the exposure we were looking at 6 weeks ago, this is a good outcome. This is the outcome that cooperation produces." "Okay," Ethan said. "What do we need to do?" "I'll send you everything today. It requires your signature and your formal acknowledgement of the specific facts as the SEC has documented them." A pause. "No contest, no denial, just acknowledgement." "I know," Ethan said. "That's how it was always going to be." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You knew that in week 1, didn't you, that this was how it had to end?" "I think so," Ethan said. Most people fight it longer than they should, Marcus said. They spend enormous resources trying to manage an outcome that becomes inevitable anyway, and they arrive at the same destination 3 years later, having spent everything they had trying to avoid it. He paused. You got here faster. Someone told me that getting honest fast was the thing that mattered, Ethan said. Smart person. Several of them, actually, Ethan said. After he hung up with Marcus, he called Linda Park. She was still the CFO of Caldwell Development Group, still holding the company together with the quiet competence she had always brought to the role. He had not been in the office in 11 weeks, and Linda had in many ways been running the operational reality of the company while the legal situation resolved. The settlement terms are coming, he told her. No criminal referral. Linda let out a breath. Good. That's really good, Ethan. How's the company? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Honest. Stable. Not where it was. 2 major projects have been put on hold pending the audit finalization. We've lost some partners permanently. But the core business is intact, and the team, the people who stayed, they're strong. Another pause. There's something I want to say to you. Say it. The way you handled this, the cooperation, the transparency, the audit. It made my job harder in the short term and infinitely easier in the long term because I could tell investors and partners exactly what was happening and exactly what we were doing about it. No one could accuse us of hiding. She paused again. That was the right call. I know it cost you, but it was right. Thank you, Linda, he said. He meant it. After he hung up, he sat in his car outside his new apartment. He had moved out of the penthouse 6 weeks ago. He was in a 2-bedroom place in Wicker Park, significantly smaller, significantly less expensive, significantly more like somewhere a person actually lived rather than somewhere a lifestyle was on display. He had bought almost no new furniture. He had kept the photograph. I went inside. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, a simple wooden table he had bought secondhand from a place in Logan Square, and he opened his laptop and started writing his acknowledgement of the SEC's documented facts. The document asked him to confirm in his own words his understanding of what had happened. Not a legal brief, not a carefully constructed narrative, just his understanding directly stated. He wrote it in an hour. He did not soften a single thing. When he was done, he emailed it to Marcus with 2 sentences. Here is the acknowledgement. I don't want to change anything. Then he closed his laptop and looked at the kitchen around him. A regular kitchen, a coffee maker and a dish rack and a calendar on the wall with actual dates written on it, in actual handwriting dentist appointment foundation call, with Rosa Thursday meeting in Pilsen, his mother's birthday. His mother's birthday was in 2 weeks. He had already bought the flights. He had not visited her in 14 months. She lived in Michigan in the same house he had grown up in, and she was 71 and still sharp and still made the same chicken soup she had made when Ethan was sick as a child, and he had not visited in 14 months because he had always been too busy, too important, too embedded in the machinery of his Chicago life to drive to Michigan for a weekend. He was not too busy anymore. I was not too important anymore, or rather he was beginning to understand that the kind of importance he had spent his life chasing was not the kind that made you a better person. It made you a busier one, and those were not the same thing. The Thursday meeting in Pilsen happened, and it was not what Ethan expected, which was to say, it was better. Maria and Sophia Reyes were in their late 20s, and James Park was 30, and all 3 of them had the particular combination of talent and hunger and slightly not quite hidden anxiety that Ethan recognized from very early in his own career when he had wanted things badly enough to be vulnerable about it before success had taught him to perform certainty instead of actually feeling it. Maria talked about the furniture business with a precision and passion that reminded Ethan of the first year of Caldwell development, when he had known every detail of every project, because the projects were still small enough for that, and he had cared enough to learn them. Sophia showed him the ceramics not in person, but on her phone photographs of pieces she had made that were sitting in 2 local shops on consignment, selling slowly but selling. James talked about the tailoring with a technical knowledge that was complete and a business instincts that were raw but real. They were good, not polished, not networked, not advantaged, but genuinely good. Why the shared space? Ethan asked. Why not pursue your businesses separately? The 3 of them exchanged a look that was so quick he almost missed it. Because separately we're 3 small things, Maria said. Together we're something people can find, something people can come to. She paused. Community is actually a business model. Not everyone sees that. Ethan looked at her. I see that, he said. The $40,000 for the renovation was committed before he left Pilsen. But more than that, he told them he was available. Weekly check-ins for the first 6 months. His personal number. The offer to make introductions when they were ready for introductions. The promise stated plainly and without theater that he would pick up when they called. Maria looked at him after he said it. She had the careful eyes of someone who had been disappointed by promises before and had learned to read the difference between the real ones and the performed ones. Why? She asked. Direct. No apology for the directness. Ethan thought about the question seriously before he answered. Because someone built things for me without me knowing it, he said. And I spent years not understanding what it cost them. And I think the only honest response to that is to build things for people who need it without expecting anything back. He paused. And because I'm better at this than I am at most things, and I've been wasting that for a long time. Maria looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once. The same kind of nod that required no additional words because it carried everything in it. The weeks continued. Ethan visited his mother in Michigan in November. He stayed for 4 days, which was 3.5 days longer than any visit in the past 5 years. His mother Eleanor was a small, precise woman who had raised him alone after his father left when Ethan was 9, and who had watched her son build his empire with the specific mixture of pride and worry that mothers carry when they love someone who is moving very fast in a direction they can see is not entirely right. She did not say, I told you so. She did not say anything about Claire or the divorce or the SEC. She made the chicken soup. She sat across the kitchen table from him, and they talked for hours the way they had when he was young, before his ambition had created a distance between them that neither had ever fully acknowledged. On the 3rd day, she said something that stayed with him. You know what I noticed, she said. They were washing dishes together, and she was handing him things to dry, and the domesticity of it, the specific ordinary warmth of it, had already done something to the wall he had never fully admitted he maintained even with her. What? He said. When you called to tell me about the divorce, she said, you started to cry. You stopped yourself, but you started. He didn't answer. You haven't cried in front of me since you were 12 years old, she said, not as a criticism, just as an observation. You decided somewhere around that age that showing me you were hurting would hurt me, and you protected me from it. She handed him a bowl. The problem is, you started doing it with everyone. Ethan dried the bowl and didn't say anything for a moment. Claire used to look at me sometimes, he said quietly, in the early years, like she could see past it, past the performance, and I think that scared me. I think I spent the last 4 years of our marriage making sure she couldn't see that far. Eleanor took the bowl back and placed it in the cabinet. Because if she could see that far, she could leave, she said. She left anyway, he said. She did, his mother said. But she left when she chose to, not when she was pushed. She turned and looked at him. That's actually a kindness, Ethan. She could have left much earlier and much harder. She waited until she understood you. He thought about that for a long time on the drive back to Chicago. She waited until she understood you. Not until he was weak enough. Not until she had the advantage. Not until she could do the maximum damage. She had waited until she understood him well enough to know that leaving quietly without money, without vindication, without the revenge narrative that he honestly would have deserved. She had waited until she could leave in a way that left the door open for him to become something better. That was not weakness. That had never been weakness. The charity event happened on a Friday evening in December, 8 weeks before the new year. It was a fundraiser for the Diana Chen organization, the educational access nonprofit. And Claire was there in her capacity as a mentor, standing with her mentee, a 20-year-old named Jasmine from the South Side, who was in her 2nd year at DePaul, and who had the specific quality of someone who was working twice as hard as everyone around her, because she understood without anyone having to tell her that nothing had been arranged in her favor. Ethan was there because the Open Door Fund had recently become a funding partner of Diana's organization, and Rosa had suggested his attendance. He had not known Claire would be there. No one had told him. The city was large and the charitable world was specific, and sometimes paths crossed, not because anyone arranged them, but because the work people do, if it is genuinely aligned, will eventually bring them to the same rooms. He saw her before she saw him. She was talking to Jasmine, leaning in slightly to hear something the young woman was saying, and she was smiling, the real kind, the unguarded kind, the kind he had seen in those early years before everything went wrong, and which he had not seen in so long that seeing it now arrived like something physical. He could have avoided her. The room was full and the event was organized, and he had people he was supposed to connect with. He could have simply done his evening and left, and let the near miss be exactly that. He didn't. He crossed the room. She saw him when he was about 8 feet away. Her expression did several things in very rapid succession: surprise, something that might have been uncertainty, and then settling over both of those like a hand placed gently over something fragile: composure. "Ethan," she said. "Claire." He stopped at a respectful distance, not crowding her, not performing casualness, just present. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I didn't know you would be," she said. Jasmine was looking between them with the alert attention of a 20-year-old who was very perceptive and was clearly understanding that she had just become the third person in a two-person moment. "I'll get us drinks," Jasmine said smoothly, and was gone. Ethan and Claire stood with about 4 feet between them and everything that had happened in the past several months in the space around them. "You're mentoring someone," he said. "Jasmine. She's extraordinary." Claire glanced in the direction Jasmine had gone, and the warmth in her face when she looked at her mentee was complete and uncomplicated. "She's going to do remarkable things." "You always saw people clearly," Ethan said. It came out before he could decide whether to say it, and it was true. Claire looked at him, not defensively, not guardedly, with the specific quality of someone who has done their own work and is therefore no longer afraid of the truth. "Not always," she said. "I missed some things about you for a long time." "You saw more than I wanted you to," he said. "Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" "Different," he said. "Better, I think. Slower," which sounds like a strange thing to say as a positive. "It doesn't," she said. "It doesn't sound strange at all." They looked at each other. 8 weeks, 3 months, 7 years. It was all present simultaneously, the way the past always is, in the rooms where it matters most. "I wanted to say something to you," he said, "and I want to say it right. Not as an apology that asks something of you, not as something I need you to receive in a particular way." He paused. "Just as the truth, because I owe you that, and I should have given it to you years earlier." She waited. "I saw you," he said, "at the cultural center, that first night. You were looking at a painting like the rest of the world didn't exist. And I came over because I wanted to know what it felt like to see something that completely—" He looked at her directly. "And then you came into my life, and I spent 7 years not giving you back what you gave me that night. And I know I can't fix that. But I need you to know that I knew what I had, somewhere underneath everything I knew. And I chose other things anyway. And that's mine. That's entirely mine." Claire was very still. Not the composed stillness of the conference room. Something different. Something that was doing its own quiet work behind her eyes. "Thank you for saying that," she said. Her voice was steady, but it had warmth in it, real warmth, the kind that does not perform itself. "You deserve to hear it," he said. "That's all." She nodded once, the small, dignified nod he remembered from the conference room, but different, softer, not armor, just acknowledgement. Jasmine returned with drinks, reading the room with the precision of someone who had grown up navigating complicated social dynamics and had gotten very good at knowing when the moment had passed and the path was clear. "I should get back," Claire said. She looked at Ethan one last time, not with longing, not with residual grief, with something cleaner than both of those, the look of a person who has settled something and can now move forward, carrying only what is actually hers to carry. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said. "You too, Claire," he said. She turned and walked back toward the center of the room, toward Jasmine, toward the life she was building quietly, intentionally on her own terms, in the way that had always been her nature, and that he had spent 7 years not seeing clearly enough. He watched her go, just for a moment. Then he turned and walked in the opposite direction toward Rosa, toward the work he had committed to, toward the evening that still had things in it that needed his presence. The last time anyone who knew both of them saw them together was that night in that room, separated by 4 feet and 7 years, and the specific, irreversible distance of two people who had loved each other imperfectly and had found their way through very different paths to something that looked like peace. In the months that followed, Ethan's life continued its slow, deliberate reconstruction. The Open Door Fund opened its first grant cycle and received applications from 43 small businesses. The Pilsen space opened in February, and Maria and Sofia Reyes sent him a photograph of the first customer who walked through the door. He put the photograph on his refrigerator. The Caldwell Development Group settled with the SEC and began rebuilding under new leadership. Linda Park was named interim CEO, which Ethan recommended to the board, and which was the best decision the board made that year. Ethan remained a shareholder and an advisor, but the daily operations were no longer his, and the relief of that was something he had not anticipated. He met with Tom Garrett for beers in Lincoln Park every few weeks. He flew to Michigan for his mother's birthday and stayed for 5 days. He took on 2 mentees through Diana's program and discovered that being useful to someone who needed something real was a different kind of satisfaction than closing a deal, quieter, slower, less immediately visible, and somehow more sustaining. He did not pursue another relationship. Not out of grief for Claire, not exactly, but out of the understanding that he needed to know who he was when he wasn't performing himself for someone else before he asked anyone else to know him. That was slow work, patient work, the kind he had always avoided. He was learning not to avoid it. Claire launched a new initiative through the Whitmore Foundation, focused on economic mobility for first-generation professional women. It was the most personally directed work she had done in her professional life, not just funding others' programs, but building something that reflected what she understood from the inside about what it meant to be underestimated, what it meant to have value that others couldn't see because they weren't looking in the right direction. Jasmine graduated 2 years later and took a position at a nonprofit doing education policy work in D.C. At her graduation dinner, she told Claire that having someone who believed in her before she had fully believed in herself was the thing that had made the difference. Claire drove home that night and sat in her apartment and thought about what it meant to be that for someone. To be the person who sees what another person is capable of before they can see it themselves. She thought about the painting at the Cultural Center. A man who had walked across a room because he was curious about what it felt like to see something completely. He had seen her once, completely, and then he had stopped looking, and then he had looked again. The story did not end in reconciliation. It did not end in second chances or romantic resolutions or the neat arc of 2 people finding their way back to each other, because real life is not arranged that way, and real losses do not reverse themselves simply because both parties grew from them. It ended the way the truest stories end, not with everything repaired, but with something better than repair. With 2 people who had failed each other and themselves, and who had done the harder work of failing honestly, instead of running from what the failure revealed. It ended with a woman who had asked for nothing in a divorce, not because she had nothing, but because she understood that what she was owed could not be measured in money or property, or the kind of justice that fits inside a settlement document. She was owed only the truth of what she had been through and the freedom to build on the other side of it a life that was entirely and completely her own. And it ended with a man who had laughed loud, arrogant room-filling at a woman he believed had nothing, and who had spent the year that followed learning with great cost and great clarity that she had possessed from the beginning the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Not money, not power, not a last name that made lawyers' hands shake. She had possessed the courage to know her own worth. And in the end, the only thing more powerful than that courage was the wisdom to never let anyone take it from her again.